there are going to be investigations that rain down on Dr. Fauci's head finally, and he is going to have to answer a lot of real questions under oath. And I believe what's going to happen is after he gets absolutely wrecked by questioning, he's going to be forced out by the Biden White House because they're not going to want to continue to try to hold Fauci up as they continue to sink further and further under the water.
What happened is that I gave an interview with a reporter and they said, you're going to have to step down sometime. You can't be in this job forever. And I said, you're absolutely right. I can't be in this job forever. And I don't anticipate I'll be in this job before the end, at the end of the first term of President Biden, which is January 2025. Somehow that got interpreted that it's announcing my retirement. I just said that it is extremely unlikely, in fact, for sure, that I'm not going to be here beyond January 2025. So sometime between now, Kate, and January 2025, you can guarantee I'll step down.
Well, I guess we can all be excited about that prospect. Welcome back to Clay and Buck. Dr. Fauci. I mean, wasn't he initially hired by President Warren G. Harding? I mean, I think he has been in the job forever, as much as anyone could be in the job forever. I mean, wasn't Fauci, around in the McKinley era? I mean, it's been a long time that he's had this job.
He's the highest paid federal employee,
which is quite a feat, by the
country.
way. There are a lot of cunning bureaucrats looking to pad those OT stats. As somebody who used to work for the federal government, I saw a lot of this stuff. And Fauci is the highest paid. There are millions of federal government employees. Fauci is the highest paid of all of them because he is such a chameleon and a bureaucrat who does exactly what he needs to do in the moment. But Clay, I don't know if he makes it to, as in his role, if he makes it to the end of the Biden first term, because if Republicans take back the House and the Senate and they do not have, I want Fauci under oath with people running the clock, people actually setting the agenda in Congress who are saying, hold on a second, why do you keep saying that masks work? Explain this data. Explain Orange County versus Los Angeles County. Explain the Florida school system, which they just pretend they didn't actually keep good data. They did. Some schools had masks, Some schools didn't. Explain the entire Florida school system, which shows that masking in schools was not only unnecessary, it was actually harmful to children. Fauci won't stick around for that. Without the media to totally carry all the water for him, I think he's going to resign early next year.
If I were advising him, I would tell him to resign immediately right now, because I'll guarantee you what it's going to look like when Republicans take back control of the House at minimum, and maybe the Senate, but certainly the House. There are going to be investigations that rain down on Dr. Fauci's head finally, and he is going to have to answer a lot of real questions under oath. And I believe what's going to happen is after he gets absolutely wrecked by questioning, he's going to be forced out by the Biden White House because they're not going to want to continue to try to hold Fauci up as they continue to sink further and further under the water. And so it's going to look way worse now than if he just decided to slink away before the midterms. And if he decided to slink away before the midterms, he could argue that his departure was not political in nature. What he's trying to do now is say, I'm going to leave before the end of the Biden administration in January of 25, so he can try to argue, well, my decision on timing is not going to be impacted by politics because, as you well know, Buck, what Fauci always tries to say is, I'm not a political person. I don't know why you'd even be getting attacked at all. Well, yes, you are the most destructive bureaucrat in American history. You, I think, probably should have faced criminal charges for some of the work that you did and helped facilitate, which created, and I don't know if we're ever going to get the full-on accepted version of this as reality, but I believe American taxpayer dollars helped to facilitate the creation of the COVID virus, which then was released out of a Chinese lab. That's how I believe, based on all the evidence that I have seen, COVID got out. I think you agree with that as well, Buck. I think a huge percentage of our audience does. But there are lots of people fighting every day to try to keep that truth from coming out. And one of them, in my opinion, has been Fauci, based on the emails that he sent back in February of 2020. I think this guy has been engaged in a cover-up of how COVID got out and how much American taxpayer dollars were involved in the creation of COVID through gain-of-function research. I believe all of that, the data is quite clear, points to him, and I think he's going to skate on it, which is unfortunate. But I believe if we had a real media and we had a real government investigation that took place, Fauci would get caught up in this and potentially could face criminal charges.
I also think that Fauci should be thought of as the biomedical equivalent of a war criminal, meaning that there should be real hearings into the damage that was done by his willingness to lie about what was so apparent in his role. The fact that he's so evasive and so slimy. It's always, we're just looking at the science and the data, and I'm a scientist. And he's got this routine down where no one's ever able to corner him on the fact that these were decisions pushed by him. And Dr. Burkes, too, by the way, who has a book out now. Some are saying she is actually worse. I believe we had on Dr. Scott Atlas, who was part of that task force, who says Dr. Burkes was worse than Fauci, she just got out sooner because she realized that it's going to get harder and harder to justify the madness that they inflicted on so many people. She seems to make the case that the 15 days to slow the spread was always just a starting point. That was always a Trojan horse, which is appalling.
If we went back in time, Buck, I think this is such an interesting discussion, the 15 days, because you're right. Her book, she basically is arguing, we managed to get Trump to do that. What if we had never shut down at all? What if, and I understand the argument of, hey, we didn't 100% know what we were facing, but what if Rand Paul, let's just say, what if Rand Paul had been president at the time when COVID happened? We had a highly trained medical physician in office, or we had somebody other than Burkes and Fauci, but let's pretend. What if we had never shut down? What if we had never 15 days to stop the spread? We had just had somebody in the Oval Office who had said, hey, this thing is going to be here for a long time. We can't stop it. The evidence is pretty clear. We've never been able to stop the spread of any virus. We are going to continue with our work. People who are in danger, in older, elderly, you need to protect. We've basically just done what the Great Barrington Declaration suggested.
We would obviously argue that based on the data, we would be in the exact same health position in effect.
Yes.
The same number of people would have gotten infected. The same number of actual fatalities from the virus would have occurred. But we wouldn't have spent $6 trillion. We wouldn't have roughly 9.5%
20 million people
inflation.
Wouldn't have quit their jobs, right? And we wouldn't have had that whole fallout.
Yeah,
essential versus non-essential businesses.
We essentially, we got to herd immunity. We just did it with the most economic and political and freedom destruction possible along the way, with no attendant benefit, which is something I actually tweeted that in June of 2020, that we're going to get to herd immunity. We're just going to do all these stupid, dumbass things that Fauci wants us to do all along that don't actually make it. And look, all over the world, who did it right? Show me the place where people say, look at Australia. Australia is an island that shut off all travel. And even Australia eventually had it ripped through. And people say, why do we have so many more fatalities? One, the fatality data is totally wrapped up in people that died with COVID versus from COVID. So we have to.
And the economic incentives that came from labeling COVID deaths.
And also, the biggest risk factor after age is obesity, and developed countries with really high levels of obesity did really poorly. We have 10 times the obesity rate of Japan and South Korea, literally 10x. So the fact that we had far worse COVID outcomes is actually tied to the health of the population.
And Australia doesn't have herd immunity, and they're actually going through COVID hell right now because they've opened back up. And a lot of these countries that have opened back up, the only place that's really still in terms of a major economy that's even attempting the COVID zero policies right now is China. And it still remains to be seen. China's growth rate, I'm sure you saw it over the weekend, Buck, is down to nearly negligible rates, which is crazy considering what the Chinese government has put out in the past.
There's so many things, Clay, that we could say about this. This is also the original formation of Clay and Buck as a force for good, freedom in the American way was over COVID sanity, right?
Yeah.
This is how we actually first met and started talking about this. And so there's so many things you can refer back to, but the fact that when there were drones in the sky in China saying, give up your heart's desire for freedom, stay inside even if you are starving, effectively, because the Chinese Communist Party says so, and Fauci wasn't coming out saying, this is appalling totalitarianism and it can never happen. What else do people need to know? What else do they have to see from this guy?
No, and again, I think the Australian story of what is happening to them right now with COVID has slid completely under the radar. New Zealand as well. They don't really have herd immunity because they were, to your point, island nations that shut down and just restricted all travel. But what you're seeing is you can't stop a virus forever. Eventually, almost everyone has to get it.